1. And before we start reading, I just want to point out a few things that I want to do going through this study and through the book of Genesis. One, I want to go verse by verse through each chapter because I want to make sure we're all familiar with the stories of Genesis. A lot of great stories in the book of Genesis. But then also, as we look at these stories, I think it's good to make personal application in our own life, which is one of the main reasons God gave us these stories. These are examples for us. There's a lot of great things and principles that we can get from them. But another thing I want to do going through the book of Genesis too is I want to try to point out all the areas where we get our doctrine from. For example, or where the New Testament would refer to Genesis when it came to doctrine. So for example, a lot of what Romans teaches about salvation is based off things that we see in Genesis, specifically with Abraham. There's even examples too of replacement theology. Galatians 4, what does it do? It goes to Genesis. And so there's a lot of things in Genesis that the New Testament talks about to teach certain doctrines that we believe. So we'll highlight all those things. And so that's kind of the goal there. But one thing about the book of Genesis, it is, a lot of people call it the book of beginnings. This is how everything got here. But, it is a lot more than just the book of beginnings. These are stories for our personal lives. These are things you ought to teach your kids. And we ought to follow the examples we see in here, learn from bad examples. But, so just like we get good doctrine from the book of Genesis, there's a lot of bad doctrine that comes from the book of Genesis. In fact, I'm just, I hate to just stereotype and just, throw out these like blanket claims that just apply to everybody. I'm sure there's exceptions out there. But your typical prophecy preacher, obviously he's going to spend a lot of time in the book of Revelation. But you know what their second favorite book is they like to preach in all the time? The book of Genesis. Okay? Now, why is it that, you're just money-grabbing, nut job preachers are always fascinated with Revelation and the book of Genesis? Now, Revelation is pretty easy because, it's about future events, end times. We're all interested in that, aren't we? But we also like it too because it kind of looks like a sci-fi disaster movie, doesn't it? All right. How many of you, all right, go ahead, take your halos off. How many of you, maybe this is just me, but you like the disaster movies and things because it's always made me think of the tribulation and stuff. All right, am I the only one that thinks that way? All right, I don't care what it is. Any disaster movie you watch, that's kind of my thinking, man. That's probably what's going to be like in the tribulation. So, I think we're probably even more interested in that probably than even the world is. But then the book of Genesis, though, now why do we like it? I'll tell you one of the reasons we like it is because it is interesting, but we've also had a lot of sci-fi weird junk shoved down our throats when it comes to the book of Genesis. And folks, that's just wrong, all right? And as we go through the book of Genesis, I'm going to address some of these things, and I'm going to show how out of line it is to teach some of the things that are being taught from the book of Genesis, especially when it comes to the Nephilim and things like that. And you say, why do people do that? I'll tell you why. Because the first 10 chapters in Genesis cover 2,000 years. Now, you can only give so much detail when you're trying to tell about 2,000 years of history in 10 chapters, making it very easy for us to just insert whatever we want. And folks, the things that people are inserting are ridiculous. And we're going to see an example right here in the very beginning. And most of the people that do this are dispensationalists, okay? And once again, if you are a preacher who does not have the power of God in your life, and you're preaching to a bunch of carnal people, talk about sci-fi disaster stuff, and talk about sci-fi, Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, trash like that from the book of Genesis. And that's why they all specialize in these things. Brian Sharp, I had Brian Sharp's whole cassette set of the book, verse by verse of the book of Revelation, but I never got his one on Genesis. I always wanted to, but I never could afford it. It was like $50. And I can only imagine, and I know he taught some really goofy stuff with Nephilim and everything, but all the prophecy guys specialize in these two books. And you know why? It's because they're circus clowns. They're entertainers, and they go from church to church teaching the entertaining stuff and half of it's trash. So I just need to get that off my chest, because we're going to debunk some of that right here in the very beginning, because people get, the devil, if he's going to attack the Bible, he might as well start right in the very beginning. And he's used guys like C.I. Scofield. And if you get the Scofield Bible, Scofield inserts his trash, he inserts his false doctrine right in between verse 1 and verse 2. Right away, he doesn't waste any time. All right, let me start filling your head with dispensational nonsense. So it says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Anybody see the gap in there? All right? And if you have a Scofield Bible, right in between verse 1 and 2, you'll have, I forgot what it says. I think it says the gap theory or something right there. And, okay, now, first off, let me say that it is not damnable heresy necessarily to say that there is a gap between verse 1 and verse 2 of this unknown amount of time. But here's the problem I have with that, okay, is if you assume that there is a gap and the Bible says nothing, absolutely nothing about what went on during that gap, that doesn't give you the right to go insert whatever kind of sci-fi nonsense you want in there. This is where they had this pre-Adamic race. This is where the dinosaurs came from. The dinosaurs are millions of years old, like the evolutionists say. It's just they were from before Adam. There was this race of angelic type beings that sinned. They're the ones that built the pyramids and built Stonehenge, and we can go on all these things that man can't explain. Science just can't figure out how they get those stones there in South America so close together you can't even slide a paper in between them. We can't do that type of thing today. Why is that? Because we haven't got the kind of technology they probably had back then. Back then they had spaceships. They had, teleporters. They had all, and you can just go into all kinds of sci-fi nonsense. Folks, even if it's true that there's a gap there, the Bible doesn't tell us about any of that stuff. And yet these guys are going to go, they're going to go preach that kind of nonsense, and people eat it up. That's just wrong. Okay? Listen, if you're all interested in what, how they built Stonehenge and, what it was used for, was it a Stargate? Was it whatever they're teaching, all right, or whatever sci-fi movie you watched. Okay? Then go to the History Channel for that. Don't go to the Bible for these things. Go to the site, go subscribe to the Sci-Fi Channel on your cable package and go watch it. And don't bring that junk into church. That's just absolute garbage. So, folks, I personally do not believe in the gap theory, or as the Ruckmanites call it, the gap fact. The gap fact. And I'm not going to take the time to go into all the scriptures they use to teach the gap fact, but it's just trash. They have nothing. It's typical Ruckmanite type, methods that they use. I'll look at one verse here in a second, but the reason I don't believe in the gap theory is because you would never get that just from reading Genesis 1. Genesis 1 all by itself, you would never get it. You have to insert that. Somebody has to tell you about it. You'd never get that. But then second of all, I think Exodus chapter 20 verse 11 is pretty clear. I think Exodus chapter 20 verse 11 is trying to, spell out something pretty simple. And it says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So God made the earth, and in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And on that first day, the earth was without form. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Okay? So all these things here that are mentioned in Exodus chapter 20, we all see there right there in the beginning, and it says he did it all in 6 days. So why can't we just take the Bible for what it says? Well, how are we going to make a sci-fi movie out of that? Forget your sci-fi movies, okay? Go to your Star Trek convention and dress up like a Klingon or something. Keep that trash out of the church. Okay, I get why people are into some of that stuff. It's entertaining. All right, Star Wars. That's entertaining, but it doesn't fit in the Bible. And I almost posted a clip of it a while back, and I didn't. I thought, I should probably talk to the guy first. I should give him a chance. He's not a well-known guy. I just came across, I watch random live streams all the time of services. And I'm watching this guy. I have no idea who he is. He's got to be a Ruckmanite. And he's teaching how there's battles going on in space with principality. You guys remember Templeton from Charlotte's Web? All right, he sounds exactly like that guy when he talks. And it was just like, are you kidding me? And he's like, he's fine. We got the first heaven, the sky, and the second heaven, that's, outer space, and the third heaven's where God dwells. Well, where is it where all these principalities are fighting? In the second heaven, in outer space. And he's like, it's pretty scary stuff, isn't it? I'm just thinking, wow. That's passing as preaching today. And it blows my mind. Random live stream, fundamental King James Baptist Church, and I'm just like, what is happening in Baptist churches? It's like, is Star Wars now real too? Maybe that's just like symbolic of what's going on with the demons and the angels out there. You got the light side fighting the dark side. They've just added lightsabers and, things. Folks, it's ridiculous. All right. No wonder churches are going downhill. No wonder things are a mess like they are. But another reason I don't believe in the gap theory too, it's based off of dispensational, retarded cross-references. Okay. Now turn over to Jeremiah 4:23. And I bring this up too because, and I'm spending some time on this because I want to teach you some things about studying the Bible that's really important, all right? So you don't make these kind of dumb mistakes. Okay, now Ruckmanites in all dispensations, they love talking about their cross-references, okay? And there is such a thing as cross-references in the Bible where you can go to one place in the Bible and you can go and find another place in the Bible where it's talking about the same thing. Cross-references are real. But in the Ruckmanite world, they tie things together just because the same words are used. They're not talking about the same thing at all. But because the same word is used, they declare it a cross-reference. And so they'll be reading about one subject over here that's really vague, and they'll go somewhere else in the Bible where it's talking about something completely unrelated, but then they'll call it a cross-reference because it's using the same word. And then they go and they mesh these things together and just create weird doctrine from it. That's exactly what they do with Abraham's bosom when they're teaching the stupidity on that. They use weird cross-references. They never look at the context of passages. And I'm not going to go into everything that Jeremiah 4 here is talking about, but look what it says in verse 23. And I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. Whoa, where have we seen that before? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It was without form and void, cross-reference. All right? And the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled. And the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of heaven were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet I will not make a full end. Now what they'll teach with this here is this is talking about